So glad you could meet us here today. And we just wanted to react a little bit to what our clients are feeling and what our referrers are telling their clients are feeling about this just the tragedy that's kind of come upon us. And so we really wanted to say, how do we help? And so we have a lot of our clients having HR issues. And so we wanted to give out this webinar just so that you could get some of your questions answered. And of course, we're always available for questions, but this should get some of the high level questions answered. And honestly, we asked some of our clients and those kind of things, what they were really anxious about. And so we're going to do these in order of what most people are anxious about. I'm just so that for people that don't know me, my name is Cindy Filer. I own Innovative Outsourcing. I have been an HR person for over 30 years and in big companies as well as in small companies. And I own staffing and recruiting firms, which many of you are involved with. And I'll pass it off to Karen for her to introduce who she is, because I think we've got some great experts on the call that can help us today.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're all staying well. I am part of the Innovative Outsourcing team, and my specialty is really in the area of human resources. I've also been in HR for over 30 years, and so have witnessed a lot of different circumstances, nothing like this, but have worked in a number of different industries, both as an HR practitioner as well as a consultant. So happy to try and tackle some of these challenges that are coming up today, knowing, of course, that we are trying to provide this guidance and doing the best that we can with the information that we have.
And then I'm going to pass it to David, and David can introduce himself. He's joining us by phone today, so you won't see his face. But David, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is David Lowell. I'm a partner with the law firm Jackson Lewis. We're a national labor and employment firm. I have been practicing law since the late 90s. I have, of course, I'm in private practice now, but also spent a significant portion of my career in-house. We, like everybody else, are helping our clients navigate this unprecedented, somewhat surreal situation that we're dealing with. But we appreciate everybody taking the time to tune in today.
Okay, so we're going to go over the biggest scenario that people are asking us about. And the question that came to us is, okay, my business has dropped significantly in its revenues. I think it will for the next 6 to 8 weeks. We have clients that are from the airline industry all the way down to, people that may have restaurant employees and everything in between, from service and manufacturing. So we're getting all kinds of questions about what do we do, because we have these people that I don't have anything for them to do, or I can't let them work because I'm not going to be able to pay them. And so we were kind of trying to think of and start through ideas of what you could do in these situations. And just as a disclaimer, we are not giving you individual advice on this that you can take to heart. I think our lawyer will tell us that, this is just our advice at this point, but this is not legal advice at this point. But we're just trying to get you information as quickly as possible. So Matt, if you could put on the screen kind of some 4 options that we're looking at. And I'm going to just start by doing one of them, and then I'll pass it to Karen. And each one we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to have both Karen and David weigh in. So the first one, I look at these as levers. So I have 4 levers here. Each one of the levers is things that you can do to reduce staff cost. And so when people come to us, of course, the best thing you could do right now is to be able to keep your employees. So if you have cash in the company and you can pay your employees and keep them, that is the #1 thing that we would love for you to do. If you're panicking and think that possibly you really need to reduce staff costs, these are some options for you. So I'll go over the first option, and it's voluntary furloughs. Maybe, and I'm not saying you have to do this in that order, but it's allowing people that might want to take a voluntary time off to take one. These could be moms that are looking at possibly homeschooling, or dads that are looking at possibly at homeschooling for the next 90 days and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do both, right? So voluntary would be best. You can do something like 30, 60, or 90 days. You would keep their benefits intact. What else can you guys say, David and Karen, about these voluntary furloughs?
Yeah, so a couple things from a legal perspective that is important is whether you're looking to furlough or you're looking to lay off or reductions in pay, you want to make, there's all sorts of different legal requirements here. And, if you're in multiple states, you want to make sure that you're complying with applicable law. I will also say that the legal landscape, both at the federal and state level, especially at the state level right now, is incredibly dynamic. I mean, there's a lot going on, temporary ordinances, regulations, laws being put into effect. A lot of stuff is proposed. So, as Cindy mentioned at the outset, this is not typical and this is not status quo. So make sure that you're reaching out to your legal partners and your third party, the extended partners to make sure that you're doing things the right way, because there's a lot going on now, everything from unemployment to paid leave, and we're going to see more of that. I would just say one other final comment on this is, when you're talking about layoffs, it's important to understand the WARN Act, which is a federal law that requires for mass layoffs specific procedures and notice.
David, is that for a particular size of company?
It is. So, it's size or the size of layoffs by percentages or by the number of layoffs. But also to keep in mind that not only from a federal perspective, many states have what they call mini WARN Acts. Georgia does not. So if you're going to have a layoff that's going to be significant, then you're going to want to make sure that you're tapping into legal resources as well. And one thing I'll mention, I know I said that was my last comment, but another important thing came to mind because I spoke with a client about this and they were not thinking about this, is I know people want to move quickly and I understand it. There's tremendous financial pressure. But if you are in the unfortunate situation where you do need to have terminations and you will be giving some sort of pay, separation pay, or a lot of times we call it severance pay, I strongly, strongly recommend that you get a separation agreement that contains a waiver of claims. It is very, very important. What you don't want is to go through this, pay somebody some separation pay, and then have them run to the EEOC and, or more significantly sue you. So all things to keep in mind. A lot of legal issues that are swirling right now.
Hey, David, does the WARN Act apply for voluntary furloughs and reduction in pay, or that's just layoffs?
So it depends on what again, great question. Conversation I had probably an hour ago with a client is, it's less about the nomenclature and what we call a furlough, and more on things like, is there a reasonable expectation that at the end of this, the person will be recalled? Or is it called a furlough to lower the blow a little bit? Or from a communication perspective, to soften that difficult and tough news? But it's really a separation with no expectation of rehire. So it's less about it's the old duck argument. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. So if you call it a furlough, but it's really, a termination with no end in sight, then those are all things that would need to be examined in determining whether WARN is triggered. And WARN also has a provision about that gives some exceptions to the notice about in circumstances where there's an unforeseen situation that impacts business. Certainly we're in that now, but these are all things to be examined. I mean, for example, at Jackson Lewis, we have a whole team assembled around the coronavirus and WARN that's all they're doing. I mean, they're kind of just dealing with this, as it relates to the coronavirus.
Okay, so David, I have many of our clients may have 15 employees.
Mm-hmm.
Are they at the level that's subject to that?
Well, generally, WARN, the federal WARN, deals with a plant closing or mass layoff affecting 50 or more employees in a single site. So your smaller employers are less likely going to be covered by this.
Are less likely not going to be covered by the WARN Act.
They will not be covered by WARN if they're smaller.
Okay, so let's talk about them for a minute. Let's talk about the small ones that may not be covered by the WARN Act. you know, if they do voluntary furloughs, meaning, hey, who wants to take the next 3 months off without pay, and we'll keep your benefits going, who wants to take the next 3 months off? Is that something that they can go ahead and do and just keep their pay up? Because they assume that these are their good employees and they want them to come back, you know, when this thing is over. So with every intention that they're coming back, is there anything that you can see that they need to do differently for that or worry about for that?
So, you know, you can certainly furlough people. I mean, I think the thing to think about it is conversely, the people that aren't furloughed are those, I'm assuming, that will be terminated. And whenever you're dealing with multiple individuals that are impacted, whether furloughed, whether kept as critical personnel or terminated, you want to look at what your data looks like, the optics, you know, in those three buckets. Let's call those three buckets people that are going to keep working. Bucket two, the people that'll be what we call furloughed and then ultimately recalled. And bucket three, the people that are terminated.
Right. You
want to look at that to make sure that there is no clustering or statistical significance of any protected class, even if it's unintentional. In other words, you don't want to look and say, hey, we didn't look at this holistically, and now we've got a lawsuit or a class action because we laid off, you know, we laid off 10 people, we furloughed 12, and we kept 5, and of the 12, we never realized it because we were in such a hurry, and of those 12, they were all over 40. And then people in bucket 2 were mixed of a different age, or hey, there's a disproportionate number of women in bucket 3. That's the stuff you always want to look at before you're executing these plans.
Okay, perfect. Let's, Karen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, the only thing I was going to say, because this came up earlier too, a question that someone had was with the WARN Act, the exception being, you know, an unusual business situation like what we're dealing with now, that could potentially be an exception. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because I think that's going to have an impact on what's happening, and companies won't have to give the 60 days notice. Right, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the things we're looking at. I mean, one thing that triggered a few things that gave employers broader latitude, for example, when the World Health Organization and then the CDC the following day classified COVID-19 as a pandemic. And what that did, for example, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that does apply to your smaller employers with 15 people. It gave more justification to do things like, and we're getting a lot of questions of, can I take people's temperatures? What questions can I ask? Because that invokes under the ADA what's called the direct threat analysis, which you have greater latitude to ask questions when there's a reasonable belief that an individual may pose a direct threat to themselves or others in the workplace. And the fact that there's a pandemic, if you are, and again, you want to be careful, but you can ask some questions about narrowly tailored questions that are designed to determine whether someone is infected or not.
Okay, let's put a pin in that because I really want to get back to that, but let's go back to our screen that we have our options. If we want to reduce pay for employees, like say a 20% across the board pay cut, is that something that we can go ahead and enact? And is there anything that we need to be worrying about? Karen, I'm going to let you go first and answer if there's anything from an HR perspective we need to be worried about.
So again, I would be looking at, as David mentioned earlier, you know, are we impacting a particular protected class more so than the other? So if we were going to reduce pay, you know, would we be looking at everybody, and then, or if not, you know, what groups are we looking at? And we want to make sure that there's not going to be some sort of disparate impact on women, let's say, or minorities, let's say, or someone who's over age 40.
Okay. Anything else on reduction in pay, David?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So, you know, if you're outside of Georgia, you want to look at your state laws. Some states require advance notice of reduction of pay, or so you want to make sure you're abiding by that. Certainly, you don't want it to drop below minimum wage.
How about the state of Georgia? Do they require that?
They don't require the notice, but you also want to be careful that the question we're getting a lot is about our exempt employees. Can we reduce their salary? You can do that. You essentially change the job, or you could make them non-exempt, and you just need to make sure that if they work over 40 hours, you're paying them overtime.
We can make our exempt employees non-exempt?
You certainly can. Yeah, you would just say, hey, look, we're going to pay you hourly, and you just want to make sure they're not working over 40 hours a week, because if they do,
right,
then they're eligible for overtime. Yeah.
Okay, and so we could tell somebody, okay, can we tell like an exempt employee? And so for those of you out there that don't know the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees, an exempt employee is somebody that's exempt from overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act. You guys should know that based on, your work level. But if we have an exempt employee that works obviously 40 hours a week and would like to, take a little bit less pay and work 20 hours a week, is that okay?
You can say, you can make an exempt employee a non-exempt.
So for the HR piece in that, I mean, you could have a person who's caring for an elderly person or has a homeschooled kid who it would really help them to pay them 50% less and have them work 50% less, and you get to pay them 50% less. So it actually might work for everybody if you look at a scenario like that.
Well, but also keep in mind that there's other things that create a little more complexity and potential risk. There's certainly more risk to your what I'll call your overtime eligible employees, your non-exempt employees working remotely, because you have to pay them for whenever they work. And you're not able to see them clocking in and clocking out, or necessarily, if you've got someone that's normally exempt and they're sending emails and working remotely, you're obligated as the employer to understand all the time they're working and pay for that. And just understand, these people are used to working, oftentimes more than 40 hours a week. The idea of an exempt or overtime ineligible employee who's paid a salary is they work whatever it takes to get the job done.
Right.
So it may be more challenging to govern and make sure that they're truly working under 40 hours, because once they go over, you have to pay them overtime.
Got it.
So David, I've got a question. So what if you have an exempt employee? You're looking at reducing everyone's pay, not necessarily the hours. If you have an exempt employee, and let's say you decide that you're going to reduce pay by 5% or 10%, can you do that with an exempt employee?
Well, an exempt employee, that's just a pay cut. Yeah.
Right.
Doing less. So, look, we just want you to take a pay cut, and we're reducing your salary. Now, let's talk about the flip side of some of the practical risks with that. So if I'm a salaried employee, the general rule under federal law is you're paid your full salary for any week in which any work is done. Right. So we don't know, and a lot of the angst from employers right now is no one knows what's going to happen. Is there going to be enough work? So if someone's salaried and you cut their salary by 10 or 20%, and they work, 5 hours on Monday, and there's not enough work for the rest of the week, you still have to pay them their full salary for that week. That's why. So certainly you can do it, but just understand the different. There's pluses and minuses to each of those. Which we've got people that all they do is wage and hour topics that are dealing with that right now, that are guiding employers through the different pros and cons so they can help them, arrive at what works best for their business.
Matt, let's look back at that chart again. If in scenarios lever 1, 2, and 4, not the reduction in pay, but the other 3, is it, we have to do a separation notice for a reduction in hours, or just if we let them totally go, or if we don't have them work at all? So if I'm going to say, okay, I'm taking my exempt employee, Bob, and I'm going to have Bob, who usually works 40 hours a week, become a non-exempt employee, and I'm only going to pay him for the hours worked, and so we're going to be really careful and not let him work over 40 and just work and pay for the hours worked. Maybe he works 10. Can he file unemployment, and do I have to file any type of a separation notice?
So I want to make sure I'm following here. So the question is, if someone's salary is reduced, can they file for unemployment?
No, if an exempt person, we turn into non-exempt and have them only work on Mondays and Tuesdays, and they're not going to work Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So we're basically, yes, their pay is being reduced, but their hours are being reduced. Do we have to file, do anything with a separation notice or with or any kind of a form, and can they file unemployment?
Yeah, so I don't deal a lot with unemployment, but unemployment, and you all might have a deeper insight than I did, because I don't deal a lot with state unemployment issues. Is generally, if you're unemployed, I mean, if your salary is reduced, you're not unemployed, you're still working.
Okay, that's only if you furlough or lay off.
Right, if there's no work.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go while we still have you on the phone, and then Karen and I are going to talk about some things after that. Does anybody have any other on the panel have any other thing that we should talk about as it relates to this screen and staff cost reduction? Karen, David.
I think there's some confusion, and maybe David can speak to this. There's been some confusion between furloughs and layoffs. And so perhaps David, could you speak to that? Because I think I've had quite a few questions about that, making that distinction.
Yeah, so I think, a furlough is when someone is no longer working, but they will be recalled. There's an expectation that they'll come back. What I equate this to in my mind is what we saw a lot of pilots and other people that were working in the airline industry after 9/11. Mm-hmm. It wasn't you're terminated and your job no longer exists. It's that you're pressing pause. Yeah. So look, your employment is paused, and at some point, which we anticipate to be potentially X months down the road, we're going to unpause it and recall you. Termination is there's no pause, it's a stop.
Okay, and Karen and I are going to spend a little bit of time at the end of the webinar talking about why you would choose one or the other based on performance and that kind of stuff. But David doesn't have to be here talking about that one. But okay, so let's go, David, to some questions that you kind of alluded to earlier that maybe has changed recently with some of the rules. I mean, things like, can we ask, I've been given the question, can we ask if an employee has been tested for the coronavirus? If I have an employee, can I ask them if they have it or if they're sick before they come to work?
Well, so at the outset, what we're recommending is that employers follow the CDC's guidelines, and they have guidelines right on their website, which contains a risk assessment. So what the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits is asking about information that may elicit information about a disability. And it also prohibits employers from conducting medical examinations except in limited circumstances that are directly related to the job. And the definition of a medical exam is very broad. It could be even something on pen and paper. For example, if I take your temperature, that's likely going to be viewed as a medical examination. So the ADA, as I noted a few minutes ago, does have narrow exceptions where you can ask about this information. And one of those situations is where an employer asks narrowly tailored questions to ensure that someone does not pose a direct threat to themselves or others. And since this coronavirus has been classified as a pandemic, that naturally gives more justification for asking certain questions. So you can ask questions, again, narrowly tailored, that should be geared towards finding out if someone has symptoms. And there's three symptoms, primary symptoms of the coronavirus. It is cough, it is a fever of the operative temperature is 100.4. So there's these symptoms, and you should stick to that. So you can certainly ask somebody, look, have you been exposed to anybody that has been confirmed positive or has symptoms? Now, when you do that, it shouldn't be open-ended. The CDC's guidance says that the operative period there is, which is also consistent with the quarantine period, is 2 weeks. So don't say like, well, look, have you been on a cruise? Have you been on a cruise ship lately? You know, if you're talking about travel, you want to talk about, have you traveled to or from a country that is deemed high risk by the CDC? You can't ask people if they've experienced a temperature of 100.4, or if they or have a fever or have a cough. Those are those three symptoms, but you can't be too broad. And I would also caution employers to be very careful, because I'm getting questions where it starts to dip into detail about family members. Like, well, hey, you live with anybody that's been exposed, that's okay. But don't start asking, well, what's wrong with your wife? Because there is a federal law called GINA that prohibits you about asking about genetic information related to family members. And also note that if you're in multiple states, certain states have privacy rules that contain title restrictions.
Let me ask a different kind of question. I've had a client today ask me if the employee feels like they don't want to leave their house, but you're keeping your workplace open, not because she's sick or not because anybody there is sick or not because they're coming into contact. It's an office building. Are we required to let them work from home because they feel like there's a threat?
No, I mean, and I've had these questions too, like, hey, look, I've got this person that's healthy and they're just scared. They just don't want to come in. Right. And in that case, you just follow your normal leave of absence policies. They want to take a sick day, but if they're not deemed as a high risk, or what the CDC would say a medium risk, which is exhibiting symptoms but have not been positively confirmed as COVID-19, then, you know, they can be required to come to work. Now, practically speaking, the real balance here is you need to keep your business functioning. But also at the same time, you don't want to pressure employees so they feel like their job's at risk and have to come in when they may be infected. So it's that balance.
Okay.
I have a question that's come up too, if I may ask, and that is, this has come up about the face mask. So, you know, people have asked, and I know these are hard to find, and they really need to be given to the people in healthcare who really need them so desperately. But if someone wants to wear a face mask at work, is that appropriate?
You know, I mean, I think this comes down to, like, if someone wants to wear this or wear that, there's no law that says that you can or can't require someone to wear a face mask unless it's an accommodation request under the ADA. Then you may be required to accommodate that. I think in this day and age, it's less likely that someone's going to walk into a place of business and see someone wearing a face mask and say, this is a little unusual, versus if that happened 2 months ago. I mean, you know, you go out to any public place, you go out to your local grocery store, and you see someone with a face mask on. So are you required to let somebody by law? No, unless it is required as an accommodation under the ADA.
Awesome. Okay. And then I guess the question, my last question would be, you know, if, just so that you can help them, I'm assuming that if any one of our clients has any questions that they could contact you right away, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to help. In fact, our firm has a nationwide team that is doing nothing but dealing with this. So we've got communications that are already drafted. We've got things that are already in place so that it could be cost effective. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'd be happy to help. My email address, I can just give that out, is david.mohl. My last name is spelled MOHL at jacksonlewis.com. And my phone number is 404-586-1808. And if you're looking for just general information to stay up to date on all these legal changes, on jacksonlewis.com, we have a dedicated website to the coronavirus that we're updating periodically throughout the day with legal updates, what states and federal laws are being enacted. So feel free to reach out, and wish everybody good health and be safe, and good luck navigating all of this. It certainly is unprecedented.
Thanks, David. And for all of you on the webinar, we're just, Kieran and I are going to stay on it. We're going to talk about a couple of other things, but we're going to let David go back to what I know is a crazy day. Thanks, David.
All right, thanks for having me. Take care.
Okay, so I wanted to just spend a bit of time going over another piece, another list that we kind of put together for you guys, because you might be sitting there thinking, and Matt, if you could go to that other list, that 3 list, if you may have 50 employees and you may have to make some tough decisions. And so I wanted to just kind of go over, and then I'm going to have Kieran speak to it as well. How do I make those decisions? I mean, it's breaking our hearts, right, to make any decisions like this. So, you know, I like to say when I'm normally talking and we don't have a crisis, that everybody should have their employees on a couple of different lists, and their managers should be participating in that. List 1 are kind of my A players. They're the ones, and it's just about 5 to 10% of your population, that if somebody brought a resignation letter to you and you got that from them, that you would just be totally undone, because you know that they're one of the people that causes your company to work. It may be a high-level person. It may be somebody who is just an hourly employee that, you know, doesn't make a lot of money, but they are critical to your operation. They have your vision. They have what you do. They may have your most important clients. So those are your A players. List 3, I'm going to skip over list 2. List 3 is your players that if somebody gave you a resignation letter and came into your office, you would, as soon as they left, you would shut the door and you would cheer. And these are the people that you've probably had on performance incentive plans and haven't improved. These are the people that everybody in the office knows that they're not pulling their weight. These are the ones that you probably should have pulled the trigger on about 3 months ago, or 3 years ago, or 10 years ago, and let go, and you just haven't. So that's the C players, and we're saying that's less than, it's definitely less than 59%. We probably got that wrong, but that's you know, less than 5% right there. And then list 2 is kind of your people in between. This should be where the bulk of your people are. These are the people that get paid the right amount of money and they do a really good job for you, right? So this is where most of your employees are. And then when you look at what am I going to do in my business, you have to look at kind of job responsibilities and needs going forward, as well as this categorization of employees. Because the most important thing, let's say I am not needing one particular area right now because none of my clients are calling me about a particular area. Well, then I need to think about, do I need to do something with that area of my company first, right? So it's more that. You know, oftentimes we say don't cut the salespeople right now because they're the ones that are going to get you back in the end. So you have to think about types of employee first. And if you have 4 executive assistants, you might be able to do with 2. You got to look at functional job responsibilities first. But then you need to look at, under those functional job responsibilities, this categorization of employees. Because if you have 15 help desk people and you have 2 that are on list 1, 1 that's on list 3, and then the other one's in the middle, it kind of shows you what you need to do a little bit there. Like, you know, maybe the furloughs happen in list 3 because you probably should have, the layoffs, because you probably should have laid them off anyway, right? And this gives you a good opportunity to do that, provided they're not all in a protected class, like we talked about. List 1, we want to really protect those people because they're the ones that are going to get you back out of this, right? Because they're your cream of the crop players. And so we need to figure out how we keep their pay as whole as possible, how we make sure that we're communicating well with them and make sure that they know that they're the cream of the crop players. And then list 2, you're going to have to make some decisions about, because they're, so list 1, we may want to not do anything. List 2, we may want to do some pay reductions or hours reductions or voluntary furloughs. And list 3, we probably definitely want to go ahead and lay off and sever, because there's no reason to give them hope that there will be time back, because this is a good opportunity to let them go. Kieran, do you want to speak to that anymore? Because I know that a lot of the people I talked to today are just heartbroken about this whole thing, but wanting to do this well.
Well, yes, I mean, they do. And it's such a tough, it's a tough environment, and it's difficult, but I think this is something that you should think about all the time, especially now, is what you want to do with all of those categories of players. And when you're looking at possibly reducing salaries, asking for people to volunteer, particularly if you're looking at, and I've had this happen with several clients, with the furlough versus layoff, and the furlough being something that I think people are looking at first. That's why it's so important, again, to think about people's overall performance and looking at evaluations, anyone who's been on plans, because that should definitely come into play when you're looking at the furloughs that need to be done. So again, just keeping up with how people are evaluated.
You mean like if they're, when you said they're on plans, you mean like they have been poor performers and you're trying to
Exactly, which is why that documentation is so critically important. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, again, if you're looking at people that need to be furloughed or a layoff situation, you want to make sure, especially where there's performance issues, that you've got your documentation, and you need to document how you made the decision. If you're furloughing, laying off, whatever you're doing at this point, you want to make sure that you've got documentation for how you chose the people and how you made the decisions.
This is when I know a lot of you have been to talks that we've given that, you know, this is when reviews, it's really important that you have reviews in the file. You know, this is really important that the performance conversations that you have are documented and signed. You know, this is where that stuff comes into play. Unfortunately, this is where the rubber meets the road. That doesn't mean that you can't let somebody go if you don't have performance reviews. We can talk through that, but this is a good opportunity to remember for later on. This is something important to focus on. That's why the HR stuff comes into play. So really important that we have a conversation about that after this whole thing is over. But
and the only other thing I would add is, again, when you're looking at furloughs and layoffs, how that ties into unemployment, because there are some very specific things that have to be done. For example, in the state of Georgia, the separation notice. And so any kind of questions you have about that and how unemployment works, that's really important to understand as well. So please feel free to come to us if you have questions about that.
Okay, Karen, any other questions? I think let's take 2 more minutes, and any other questions that you can think that we've gotten that might be really important. Let's talk about remote work quickly.
Sure.
So we're not going to have a lot of time on this. We did not want to make this too long to discuss that. We may do another one at another time about remote work, because there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that people are using their time productively. I mean, if anybody's heard me speak, I always say there's only 15% of the population that should be working remotely, which should scare you right about now, because everybody's working remotely, right? Because there's only certain people that can really work without supervision. So how do we put cadences and practices in place so that they feel like they're being supervised and we feel like we have control? So once you kind of come up, maybe we'll do this again at some point soon with Karen and I to come up with some scenarios on remote work. I know there's been a ton of information out there about it from SHRM and everything else, but you know, maybe we'll just give you some good practical points at some point in the future. So anything that jumps out to you on that from calls that you've had recently, Karen?
Again, if you're going to think about doing that, the most important element is 2 things really: communication and tools. So do your employees have the tools? Do they know how to use them? And then how are you communicating? Because again, you're not seeing them in the office. So you've got to have those constant check-ins and figure out how the team's going to operate and who's going to be the owner and take ownership. So the communication will be critical.
Yeah, and that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for them, and it's going to be a challenge for you. And I know these days it's kind of like, or at least these early days, we're kind of like, oh gosh, I have so much to think about. I don't have time to think about what Jane is doing in her 8 hours, because I am trying to keep my head above water and figure out how we're going to pay the bills. So, you know, I totally understand that. We're going through that at Innovative Outsourcing right now as well. So we are here with you. But I think if this prolongs past this 15 days, I think we're going to be needing to really help a little bit more, and maybe helping you get some structure and some additional tools. So we'll be thinking of that. So with that, we're going to close. We're excited that we can help you in any way possible. If there's anything that we can do for you, we really want to be a partner for you. We were so glad David could join us today because honestly, Karen and I are HR people, but there are so many legal implications to some of this stuff that it goes really quickly from HR to we want you to make sure that you don't get yourself in trouble on the back end. So and if you call us about HR stuff, we will probably answer questions up to a point and then say, you're going to have to call Fisher Phillips or or Jackson Phillips or somebody else like that before long, because some of these things are not HR issues, they're legal issues. Yeah. And of course, we don't want to answer those questions. So anyway, with that, we're gonna close up for today. If you have questions, give us a call, and we are hoping and praying for your businesses and your employees. And we just are hope for all of us that this thing is over quickly. So y'all have a nice day.